Welcome back, friends. I have some good news and some bad news, and we'll start with the bad news. At the time of the recording of the next couple of episodes, I was feeling pretty rough, and as such, my voice is a little muffled, and I'm afraid you'll have to bear with me. The great news is that this week's guest, Naomi Lerer, CEO of Noah Girls in London, shares with us some truly profound ideas surrounding mental health in children, teenagers, and adults, educating us on the fundamentals surrounding various types of mental struggles and how we, as the wider community, can learn to understand what we are truly seeing, along with practical tips and advice on how to strengthen the mental well-being of ourselves and of those around us. We also discovered that mental health and mental illness are two completely different things, which can coexist if managed correctly. Just a word of caution that in this episode, we discuss suicidal ideation, self-harm, and other forms of mental illness. Please consider your surroundings when playing this episode. A special thank you to Alex Haffner and Maxim Cohen for your continued support of this podcast. Here is my conversation with Naomi Lerer. I hope you enjoy. Okay, Naomi, thank you so much for taking the time. As I've heard from your staff, I shouldn't take it for granted. You've got a very busy schedule, so I really appreciate it. Tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you grew up, and your journey into the world of child, adolescent, and family psychological therapy.
So thank you so much. Really lovely to be here. So I'm actually from Manchester. And as a teenager, I was very involved in lots of communal work. I was a madracha for my youth group Ezra. I taught in Teenage Centre. I did lots of various different charity projects. And I then got quite involved in Aish, and I was a madracha there. And I just really loved being involved in the community. But I was doing a business degree and always intended to kind of be more in that world. But at the same time, doing communal work on the side. And during my year placement during the business degree, I actually decided, well, I'll just do a year working for Aish because it's a great opportunity. And then after university, I'll go out to the wider world. And there, I just absolutely loved it. I just realized that that's what I wanted to be doing. I wanted to be giving to community. It really filled me up. Yeah. And then I also, at that time, I met my husband who was studying smicha, so becoming a communal rabbi. I ended up becoming youth director in Hampstead Garden Suburb, and then got very involved with teenage girls, doing various different projects with them. Started working more with girls at risk, kind of through some of the work that I was doing. And then, probably a little arrogantly actually, and naively, I thought I knew what I was doing, but you know what? It would probably be helpful just to get a piece of paper that says that I know what I'm doing.
After your name.
Yeah, just kind of like maybe just even do, and I thought I'll just do a postgraduate certificate. I did it at the Tavistock. It was 1 day a week. And that felt really manageable. And I thought, it would just be helpful. Prove that I know what I'm doing. Mm. And I just entered this world where I just realized how much I didn't know what I was doing and how much there was to learn. And it was phenomenal. It was really exciting. And I think what was also really interesting is that, so it started me on that journey. And I think if I would have started thinking, okay, I'm going to study for the next 6 years, I was working, I already had 3 kids, I was pregnant with my 4th when I started. I think if someone would have told me, it's 6 years and you'll be studying and working and setting up a charity, I probably would have thought, let's not start because this is too much. But actually, each year, which was the beauty of it, was a qualification in itself. And each time I just thought, do you know what? I'll just do 1 more year. Amazing. So I'll just do the postgraduate diploma. I'll just do the master's. Okay, maybe I'll just do this. And then 6 years later, I was a child psychotherapist and was qualified. And I think that's sometimes actually something that's really important is sometimes you can get overwhelmed by the enormity of something you might be taking on. But if you just think about it as just this year and just reassess, then actually it feels more achievable.
That's incredible. So yeah, that's a very powerful point because I think a lot of people just get overwhelmed by the thought of how extensive this journey is going to look and they just don't embark on it. And here you are just doing bite by bite and This is where you're up to. That's incredible. I know Noah deals specifically with challenges faced by teenage girls, and we will get to that later in the conversation. But first, I'd like to establish some fundamentals and groundwork surrounding the topic of mental health in general. Can you break down for us, in professional terms, what the definition of anxiety is and what some of the causes of that condition would look like?
Anxiety is like an emotional response to stress. I think what's really important to remember is there's good anxiety and there's bad anxiety. So often people think of anxiety as something really negative, but actually it's really essential to our daily life. If I have a cup of water near your equipment and I spill it, it's appropriate that I'm anxious because that anxiety will fuel me to quickly go and kind of mop it up so it doesn't actually destroy your equipment. Or if you've got a child who's going to cross the road, you want them to have a certain amount of anxiety so that they look left and right and they cross safely. Or, before an exam, that's what we want to make sure we have a bit of anxiety. So that actually we then go and revise. But the challenge is when anxiety grows so big and sometimes either becomes disproportionate or just overwhelms us. So if you are before an exam and you become, even if you've studied really hard and you become so overwhelmed with anxiety, it can block your thinking, it can cause you to freeze, and then you can end up failing.
Right.
Or again, crossing the road, it might end up that you're so anxious that you just try and avoid roads or stop going out. So I think anxiety, we have to remember, is a really important function. We need it. But when it starts coming into our life in a way that actually causes us to stop functioning in a helpful way, that's when there's a real concern.
People struggle with identifying in themselves at that point, like when is this acceptable? When is this getting borderline not so acceptable? Because when you're in that moment, it's hard to even realize that it's affecting, like you said, the water, the equipment. It's a great example because I often have guests in my studio and we're recording and the first thing that comes out is bottles of water and it's like, should I, shouldn't I? But at what point is that like unhealthy?
Yes. And that's why sometimes it's helpful to get the advice of someone outside, because actually sometimes we can have anxiety about the anxiety.
Right.
So I think it's really important to think about how much is impacting you on your daily life and how much it's stopping you doing things. And if it's stopping things that actually we really should be doing, then that's normally a sign that there's a problem. But also anxiety comes out in lots of different ways. So sometimes it's a physical issue, like headaches and stomach aches, or just kind of your heart racing in a way that actually feels really, really scary. Or sometimes it's just more psychological and then prevents you from doing certain things. So it's about how much it's impacting you and preventing you from doing things.
Interesting. And those repercussions or those results of the anxiety, they can happen at a time when you're not necessarily worried about anything specific. Is that correct?
So it can be. There's different types of anxiety as well. So sometimes it is on something very specific. That's often called phobias. So if you're really anxious about dogs and really afraid of them, so that will only show up when you see a dog. And that's more almost like localized. And then there's generalized anxiety disorder, which spreads across lots of things, or social anxiety, which impacts when you're with people. And again, if you've got social anxiety, that can impact so many parts of your life. It's so varied and so wide that it's hard just to give that specific definition. It's just about how much it impacts what you're doing in your daily life.
Okay, fantastic. What about depression? We hear the term being thrown about quite a bit. Surely there's various degrees of it and how it affects people. I want to understand how depression is defined in professional terms and what indicators somebody could look out to see if this is something which is actually affecting him or it's just low mood, horrible winter. Like, how do you know what to look out for to see if this is really an issue that needs to be reckoned with?
So that's really important because there's lots of different ways that they throw out that word depression a little bit too easily sometimes. So you can have low mood, you can have depressive feelings, you can be depressed, you can be clinically depressed. There is a whole spectrum. And I think the question is, you're saying when to worry. How do you notice when it's something that's really concerning? And everyone has days where they might feel a little bit low. It's a couple of things to look out for. Number one, it's about how long that's happening for. So, as I said, it can be okay to have a couple of days, but if your low mood is going on for weeks, then that's more of a concern. But it's also about how much it's impacting your whole daily life and how much it's impacting your relationships. And to be really careful of the fact that if it is stopping you having joy in things that you used to have joy in, and you're not able to have joy in anything at all in your life, then that's a real concern. But I think also it doesn't necessarily matter whether it's low mood that you're having for a certain amount of time or depression. Actually, we can all do things that really help us, and that can prevent low mood or depressive feelings turning into something more. And there's so many things we can do that are good for our mental health. And it's easier to be proactive when it's more low level than it is once you're faced with severe depression. So we all know, for example, that doing exercise is exceptionally helpful for your mental health. It's a lot harder to do when you're really depressed to go out and do it.
Sure.
When actually when you've got low mood or you're struggling a bit, that's possibly somewhat easier to do. So it's about actually noticing, am I struggling? And if I'm struggling, it's really important to go and try and get that help, that more preventative help.
Right.
It's also like when you don't wait to have a heart attack before you go and do something. If you know that your cholesterol is high, that's the time when you should start thinking about changing your diet.
Right.
Because it's easier to do before you then go have a full-blown heart attack. So it's exactly the same with mental health.
I like that definition of if you're not enjoying the things you're used to doing, because that can just sort of happen as like a sort of a gradient effect. You don't realize as that transition is happening, but then suddenly you take stock and think, gosh, like this is just feeling very monotonous. And it's the ability to step back, see the scope of where things were, where things are now, and realizing that it's time to make a change and time to fix things up. Can a person develop one's own mental health issues like you mentioned, due to poor lifestyle? Is it perhaps bad food habits, or just sitting at a desk all day, not exercising, not going out to the big wide world? Are there ways to develop these things, negative thinking, or is it always the result of something external happening in somebody's life that would trigger an issue?
So it's an interesting question, because I think that the things that you were speaking about first, they're all things that contribute to poor mental health. So if you've not got a good diet or you've got negative thinking, I think there's a question about why is it that you have negative thinking and why do you have poor health? And I think so often that's environmental factors or things that have happened in your childhood, sometimes things that you don't even remember in those really fundamental early years. There's this idea that, well, if we don't remember it, then it doesn't really impact us. But those 2-3 years are so crucial and so fundamental in terms of our brain development, in terms of how we then function at a later stage in life. So sometimes we can be aware of what the challenges are, sometimes we're not. And there's so many different things that can impact our mental health. But I think it's more about what we can do about it. So I think some of those, the negative thinking, the poor diet, those are all things that we can proactively do something about that will then positively impact our mental health.
That's fascinating. We'll get more to the timeline you mentioned about the children early years, and I want to get back to that in a bit more in depth later. Can these things, or can these issues run in a family?
So it's a really tricky question, that. And there's a part of me that just feels like I don't even want to answer that, because there's so much stigma around mental health. And sometimes we want to avoid thinking about that might re-stigmatize, but actually it's probably important to tackle it. I think there is a genetic component. We know there's a certain element of with some mental health disorders, just like there's a genetic component with some, kind of physical health disorders. And there's also a huge environmental factor, and that nature nurture is something that we don't fully know exactly. But for me, probably one of the most crucial things when we're thinking about mental health is that we never really know what's going on behind closed doors. And within the shidduch world that we're surrounded by, there's such a desperate need to hide things because maybe there's a genetic component. People think, well, therefore I must avoid that. But in reality, we never know what we might end up facing in life. We never know what our children might end up facing. What we do know is no one goes through life without challenges, whatever they may be, whenever they may occur. And what you want for your child is for them to marry into a family that they have the courage and bravery and kindness to stand beside their child, whatever it is that's going on for them, and they're able to embrace them and not judge them. And so when I see families who are struggling and who they've got a child who's struggling, and that they don't hide it, and they're really there alongside their journey, whether it's with mental health or whether it's maybe they're struggling with the Yiddishkeit, whatever it is, and they're able to stand firmly beside them without feeling overwhelmed by shame that they have to, then I think, wow, what an incredible family. And that's someone that you want your child to be surrounded by, so that that's the protection that they have, whatever they may face.
Okay, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I want to just sort of jump around a few different areas of mental health, and then we're going to come back towards the work you are doing with Noah. Why would somebody choose to self-harm? Surely in their mind, they're going through a very painful journey, and it's hard for them. Why would they want to cause more pain upon themselves if they're already so upset and so hurt by where they are at the moment?
So self-harm is really tricky to understand because there's different reasons why people might self-harm. So sometimes people self-harm because they're so overwhelmed by the emotional pain that they're feeling that they just want to escape from that. So actually by causing physical harm to themselves, that then stops them thinking and they're just focused on the physical pain. Sometimes people self-harm because they just feel so dead inside. They're not feeling at all. All their feelings are kind of totally blocked. And they're desperate to feel. So they do that through physically hurting themselves. And sometimes people will self-harm because they want to be able to express what they're struggling with. And sometimes they want people to know that, but they don't know how to communicate that. So sometimes that's conscious, sometimes that's unconscious, but it's a way of communicating their pain to other people. And sometimes that's misunderstood. It's seen as attention seeking in a really negative way, when actually it's just a way to communicate. And generally, people don't self-harm more often than a few times if they're not able to kind of get something from it more than what people will term as attention. And it can be incredibly addictive. It can release certain chemicals that then, have a very addictive nature. So the really important thing is that people around that person who's struggling, so their family, their school, are able to show real compassion and understanding for it, but also help to guide people in terms of how they can use more healthy ways to be able to manage their struggles and their emotional pain, and helping to teach them what there can be, whether it's kind of holding ice that kind of sometimes can give them that sensation. Or there's so many different tools that they can use. It's often people who struggle to regulate their emotions as well. So how do we help people to regulate their emotions in a healthier way? But it's very important to come from a place, first of all, of a validation and compassion for them, for why they're doing what they're doing, and not dismissing it, which I understand is hard, because it's hard to understand why would someone hurt themselves when they're already in pain.
So it's really a cry for help, to be understood, or a cry to convey a message rather than, and then it could be.
It can be. I think that's it. It can be. So lots of people might self-harm and no one knows about it, and they'll do it in a very hidden way, and and a part of the body that no one will see. So for them, they're not even able to communicate that, but they're doing it more for other reasons. And again, it could be for all three of those reasons. It could be just for one. Everyone's different.
Wow. There's so much to discuss on each of these, and I know I'm rushing through them just to get through the titles of each of them. Eating disorders. This was listed on the NOAA website, I believe, or on the impact report, as the second most fatal health disorder, which I found shocking, because we don't really hear. It's not a topic spoken about a lot. We know it exists, but we don't hear about it as much as anxiety, as much as depression. Firstly, why is that? And what does the struggle of eating disorders look like?
So I think maybe people don't hear about it as much. So I think it's one of, as you said, one of the highest mortality rates. There are some studies that show it's the highest. Some say it's the second highest. So I think it's not as prevalent so maybe anxiety and depression is more prevalent. So there's more people struggling with it, but the mortality rate particularly with anorexia is exceptionally high. I think it's also because it can be really easy to hide as well. And that's why actually in the Orthodox community, we see very, very high rates of it, because it's just, there's lots of different reasons, but one of them, it is easy to hide, and you can hide it for a certain amount of time. And then once it's then known and discovered by family members or by other people, it's already got to a level which is actually very concerning. And once I would say with an eating disorder, you cross over a line, it's really, really hard to reverse it, because it changes the way people think, and it becomes obsession. Like if you ask anyone who's struggling with an eating disorder, like how much they're thinking about their eating, it's normally like 95% of the time their mind is consumed by eating. And often people think about it, again, from their own eyes. So they think, oh, they just won't eat. Why won't they eat? But actually, they feel they can't eat. It's so much more than won't. They literally can't, because their brain is telling them something, that the food is poison. If someone said to you, eat this, and you know it's poisonous, you just wouldn't eat it. Yeah. That's what their brain is telling them that the food is. So it's so essential to get that early help. And actually, we were really fortunate. We just got a very big grant for our new disordered eating program. So we've always supported disordered eating, but it's kind of really opening that up, because actually getting to help support young people when it's just disordered eating can really be transformative in stopping it then turning into an eating disorder, and just really getting the early stages. And I think the challenge is, totally understandably, parents are really nervous. They don't want to bring attention to it. If they see their child struggling somewhat, they're not really eating, or they're a bit obsessed with the diet, it can feel really scary. And if I bring attention to it, it's going to make it worse. Yeah. When actually it's so essential to get that early help. And that's why one of the things we're doing is we're just even opening up just to having a dietitian, and coming and getting comfortable with food and thinking about food plans and cooking in a certain way to try and get past that. And it's something I feel so passionate. I've seen so many young people turn from really, really healthy adults, and then the eating disorder totally, they stop being them and they become their eating disorder. And it's such a dangerous road. So that early intervention is just so key.
Is an eating disorder a very hyper version of anxiety, like zoned into a specific issue?
So people often don't think about it. It's really interesting you said that, because often it can be caused by severe anxiety, and it's another outlet of it, but then it just turns into its own beast. And there's so many different reasons why as well. Like it's so much about control. So often when there's a lot of things that people can't control in their lives, this is an area where they can control it. And also they can control it sometimes quite quietly and secretly. It's interesting because if you ask a parent when they think their child started with the eating disorder or started struggling with food, nearly always, without exception even, I would say that for the young person, it's at least 6 months earlier where they started getting obsessed, but that, it wasn't necessarily clear and noticeable. And again, being able to kind of know that they've already been struggling. So just getting on there, getting that early intervention and getting that help can really can really save their life.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You already answered my next question, which was how that journey looks for a girl going through that issue. But you've spoken about the grant and the process of how you tackle that. Anything more you want to add on that? Or?
Well, I think that's actually the beauty of what Nora does is it's very unique, and it really looks at each girl in an individualized way and what she needs for her support. So some girls might come already with an eating disorder and they might need a therapist and a dietitian and a family therapist for the parents to help support them. For some girls who aren't yet ready to deal with it directly. So we have some girls with disordered eating or eating disorders who won't think about the eating disorder at all, but they are still able to come and to work building a relationship with a therapeutic relationship with someone in a very creative way. And through that, we're then able to get them to a place where they're then able to work on it. It might take a year of just that engagement in order to get them to a place. And it's so important when you're working with adolescents to remember that so many adolescents just are not able yet to sit in a room and talk about their challenges and need a much, much more flexible, creative way to doing that. So it's really important. Look at what the young person needs here, there. And sometimes it's just about helping the parents until the girl is able to then help herself.
A frightening statistic put out by Noah last year stated that 50% of mental illnesses, of lifetime mental illnesses, begin at the age of 14. Now, if we lay out the lifespan of a human sort of in linear form, if we can imagine that, what is it that starts to happen at that point that then triggers this transformation?
So I think it's probably by age 14. Not at age 14. Maybe we wrote it wrong, but it's probably by age 14. So that means that at some point before that stage.
Okay.
But I think adolescence is a really difficult and tricky period. And sometimes we forget as adults what it's like, where there's so many changes that are going on. There's so many physical changes. There's a need to separate from your parents. There's the whole social side of it and the pressures of that. But actually, it's never been so hard to be an adolescent, especially a teenage girl. Nowadays, the pressures on teenage girls are just immense. And I think when I was younger, there was a lot of pressure for teenage girls to still look pretty to a certain degree and have a certain body weight. But actually, we haven't taken that away. We've still got that more intensely than ever, but we also have a lot of pressure for girls to achieve academically and to have great jobs. And I am a huge believer in that girls should have all these opportunities. And I think that's phenomenal. And I really, really fundamentally believe that. But we also have to remember that we've not taken away the pressure on how they should look. So it just adds on and those enormous pressures for teenage girls. And then obviously we have social media. And I think we talk about it quite a bit. So people get desensitized with how dangerous it is.
People hear the words and they're like, blame
I've heard it all before and it's all social media.
Yeah.
It absolutely is crippling for teenage girls. It was, as I said, it was already hard to be a teenage girl. And if you are bombarded all the time with this need to look perfect, in terms of the picture that's on and the FOMO that it creates. I once did a group of teenage girls aged 13 and we were talking about Instagram and the pressures of it. So they all had Instagram and we were talking about how many likes they needed to feel good about themselves. And I remember they were saying about 80, 90 likes. If otherwise they would think that they don't look pretty, and they needed 30 likes in the first 10 minutes. Otherwise they need to take the picture down. And we talked about all the challenges of it. And I asked them at the end of the session, how many of you would take away Instagram from the world if you could? And they all put their hand up. Wow. And yet they're all on Instagram. And we're crippling our teenage girls. And we know that going through puberty for teenage girls is really, really hard. And we know all the pressures. And then we just add this thing that is so dangerous.
So they're working with like a mental currency. They've got this new banking system essentially that's feeding the mind.
Yeah, in such a negative way. And then I think for girls who aren't brought up social media and in the more kind of Haredi world, which I think they're so fortunate that they don't have that. But actually the shidduch system is their social media sometimes, in the fact that feeling that you're being watched all the time and that you have to look perfect and be perfect and everyone's noticing you. So again, it's not that we can't avoid the fact that we have the internet, we have social media, and we can't avoid the fact that we have the shidduch system. There's lots of really, really good things about it. But it's about being really mindful of all the challenges and how do we combat that? How do we build resilience in a world where this is what we have.
Financing your next property should never be a headache. Alex Haffner at Fusion Funding set out to change the way investors fund their purchases. With a personal and boutique approach, Alex is driven to finding financial solutions that work for you and your particular requirements. From small independent units to large residential blocks and everything in between, Alex has built a reputation as a trusted funding provider that understands, delivers, and helps his clients win every step of the way. Reach out to Alex today, details in the show notes. I want to zone back into that in terms of the actual brain development of a young child. Like, is there a certain point where like they start to translate things around them? From a professional perspective, I want to hear not just, the kid's growing up and he's, gets a bit terrible twos and then it goes into different stages, but mentally, is there a certain development that's going on in their brain when now they're ready to start having mental health issues because mentally they're developing? Like, at what point does that journey begin?
So actually, when I remember one of my lecturers saying, and when I just started saying, it's so important to study child development and what's normal. And I remember in our very first lecture, they brought in 2 adolescents, just normal adolescents. I think they were just children of a couple of the professors, for us to see what's normal adolescence, because it's really important to remember what's normal to understand what isn't. So many times you'll hear parents complaining about their teenagers and what they're doing. And I'm like, that's just normal teenage behavior, and that's what you want. You want your kids to go through the normal. If teenagers don't have some form of rebellion, if they're not shouting in some way at their parents, actually that's when you worry, because what will happen is it'll happen later in life, and you do not want that. So actually sometimes it's really important when you're having your door slammed in your face and your kid's screaming at you or not talking to you. Okay, that's normal, and that's what we want. And it's a bit like when you have in terms of developmentally in the first 2-3 years, the terrible twos, it's really normal for children to be doing that and to try and exert their control and understand the world. And then they go through a more latent period where they're okay and they don't need that. And then they go through this adolescent period where it's all reawakened. Their brain is completely changing. And
when does that start? So
around puberty time, which nowadays it's obviously different for each child, but we know it kind of starts earlier. And sometimes you kind of notice like, oh my gosh, my child's being really seems to be either really aggressive or really moody. And it's normally that's happening. And we used to believe that is all very hormonal, but it's actually more than that, or it's a bit different to that. It's actually about the brain development. And it's about having, you have the thinking brain and the emotional brain. And when teenagers are going kind of through that development and their emotional brain totally takes over, it totally takes over their thinking brain. And so they become very reactionary. And actually, as parents, sometimes we have to hold that thinking brain for them. We need to be that. It's exhausting, but we have to be that thinking brain for them because, and if, again, we understand it as from a brain development point of view, and we're trying to help them create that ladder between their emotional brain and the thinking brain in order to get to that place where they're able to use that more. So because they're in this state where they're thinking more emotionally, and because they're trying to separate from their parents in a way that can feel really tricky, and because they've got all these social pressures, often things will come out then in a way that will then cause their mental health. So sometimes they might have stuff that's happened when they were younger, but it hasn't really come out so much. This is sometimes a place. Having said that, lots of times we do see younger children really struggling with their mental health. And as in when I remember speaking to a girl at Noah. I actually found this really shocking because I had a child who was in primary school, at the same age that she was talking about. So it was in year 3. When she was in year 3 of primary school, she was talking about dreaming of going onto the roof of school and jumping off it and having these really strong suicidal thoughts when she was in year 3. And to think that we have children who are in primary school who are having those thoughts, who are really struggling. So you absolutely can at different stages. The key is she wasn't able to communicate that during that period and wasn't able to get the help. And so then that kind of got shut down for a bit and then really came out in force when she was a teenager. So it became extremely suicidal, severe self-harm. So again, it's when any child is struggling at any age, the key is to try and get that support as soon as possible.
You're saying that critical point is to keep that balance of the adult has to see the two brains and make sure there's a bridge between one and the other. If you get enmeshed in it, it's very quick to sort of let it escalate, and then the child just sees another child in the room rather than knowing what to aspire to and how to get past.
And it's easy to say it. We can sit here and say it, and I can talk about it in theory all the time, and then when my own teenagers are behaving in that way, of course, sometimes we're very impulsive and we respond to the wrong part of their brain. Because we're triggered by it. But sometimes just keep reminding ourselves. And again, it's really about reading and educating yourself about what's normal in order to help keep reminding us that what's going on.
Really fascinating. Sometimes people are fearful of interacting or being around others who are expressing mental health issues for fear of developing perhaps thought patterns that they're seeing in other people. Is that a myth, or is there some truth to that concern?
So gosh, yeah, another tricky question. So I think probably what's really important to say is mental health isn't catchy.
Right.
So if someone's really, really struggling with depression or anxiety or self-harm, and the other person is not struggling with their mental health, they're not going to be catching it. That's not. And so in that form, definitely it's a myth. I think the challenge can be for some parents, and probably where this comes from, is that if there's kids or teenagers who are struggling with their mental health, and maybe they're self-harming, or some of the ways that they're managing their emotions isn't the healthiest way, and you've got a child who themselves are really vulnerable and themselves are struggling, there is a fear and a risk that if they're then in a group that are doing some quite harmful behaviors, they'll then learn some of those behaviors, and then they'll start using those strategies to help them manage their mental health, which isn't helpful. Or if they're drug taking and someone's really struggling, and then they see, oh, this is a way I could do it. So that's really understandable why parents will be really fearful. There's the other side of it where so often when people are struggling with their mental health, and we hear this so many times from young people, is that feeling of isolation and that feeling that I'm the only one who has depression, who feels these thoughts, can that in itself be so damaging? And then when they're surrounded by sometimes other people who are also struggling, then it can help actually to be quite healing, to not feel alone, to not feel I'm strange or there's something so different about me. So the key is how, when people are in some form of group and your child is mixing with some of these kids, how do you able to kind of help them to be thinking about it in a healthy way? And that's why it's so important that any young person has healthy adults that they're able to talk to about their challenges, whether that's a parent, although so often it isn't the parent that they want to be speaking out, whether it's a different healthy aunt or a close family member, or whether it's a therapist that is able in a way that they're not so triggered, because as a parent, you feel things very emotionally because you're the care that you have for this child. So, but is able to help them to think about it and to reflect on some of the things that they're doing, so that they hopefully can then make better informed decisions.
Incredible. Are these things that people have to reckon with for life once they've developed an issue like that?
So we've definitely seen people struggle with mental health and then able to, I don't know the words, recover from it or lead really healthy, meaningful lives. I've seen that so many times. And there is hope. Sometimes when you're in the midst of like struggling with mental health, or a parent who's got a child, it feels so hopeless, but we have seen so many times that actually with the right support and with the right help, they are able to recover and lead incredible lives. I think sometimes it's really about ensuring that you have the tools and strategies, so that it doesn't mean that there won't be times in your life where they may resurface. So you might feel low mood again, depressed again, you might feel anxious again, the eating disorder might start rearing its head when you have different important life moments, when maybe you have loss in your life or something big that changes. The key is about having those strategies in your toolbox to be able to use, or just the ability to be able to say, okay, I see that I'm sinking a little bit. Okay, now I need to go for help. I was just talking to one of our graduates recently. She's so inspirational. She's just been through such horrors and just had such a horrific childhood and had a very, very, very difficult journey, a severe eating disorder, was suicidal, and I mean, incredibly courageous and really inspirational how she turned her life around. But sometimes there are things that are still kind of coming up. And what's so brilliant is that she's able to know, I can see things are a little bit difficult. I can see things are hard. Now that's when I need to go and ask for help. And it stops her sinking. And that's the key. It's not about, am I going to recover? Am I going to not? It's about, do you have the ability to know the signs when I need to go and ask for help? Because there's just no shame in going to That's so important, to go and ask for help when you need it. And then having that toolbox inside you to be able to strengthen you to know how to deal with it when life throws you these challenges.
Which is essentially what you're doing here with Noah, is giving people that toolbox.
That's our aim.
That's your aim.
Yeah.
Does that define mental health versus mental illness? They can coincide together, meaning a person's mental health can be the backdrop of a mental illness, but if it's managed correctly, then they can still, like you're saying, live a productive life. Is that the correct definition of the two?
Yeah, I think the word mental health is often defined so many different ways.
Right.
And so some people think mental health means you're struggling.
Right. Which doesn't make sense.
Which doesn't make sense because we all have mental health, just
Right.
like we all have physical health. Sometimes we have good mental health. Sometimes we have
Right.
bad mental health. So mental health is just your mental resilience, your emotional intelligence, all of those things. Mental illness is more of a diagnosed mental health condition. So, and I think what's actually really important as well is you can have mental illness and still have good mental health. So,
Right, that's my question.
yes, yeah. So you could have, let's say, bipolar disorder that you have for life, but actually you're managing it. You've got the right tools, you're taking your medication, you're doing all the good things. So you can have better mental health than someone else who doesn't have mental illness, but isn't actually able to look after their mental health.
Fascinating.
So
because we mush all these terms together, but
Yes.
really a person can have an illness and have the tools to deal with it and still live a productive life. It's incredible.
And we're all about, I like to use the word mental strength.
Right.
In the fact that we're all about building mental strength. Because again, the word mental health is so stigmatized. And actually we want our kids to be mentally strong. We want to be mentally strong.
It's not we're not taught this stuff in school. So we need, we're going to go through that experience and then master tools to help us get through it.
And that's why actually a big part of what we do at NOAA is that education in schools.
Right,
So we go into schools and we educate the girls, we do the teachers, the parents, in order, how do we build, it's not necessarily directly talking about self-harm or
Right.
it's
Even a healthy
talking
person can master tools to help them
Yes.
live a healthier life. It's like
how do we
anything.
have a healthy relationship with our body? How do we have a healthy relationship with our friends and build it and really giving that emotional resilience to people and seeing how they can look after their mental health can be transformative and can stop people. Sometimes it's just about stop people slip to a certain level so that when various different life situations happen, they can just manage it.
Is there a bigger percentage of girls versus boys, men versus women in this space?
So I don't know actually what the stats are. They definitely say there's more girls coming forward
Right.
to say that they're struggling with their mental health, without a doubt. I think what's interesting is the suicide rates of those who actually commit suicide is much higher or significantly higher in men. And so what that's saying is often, it's not that I think there's more suicide attempts for women, but there's more success rate in men. And that's often because women are better at communicating they're struggling and therefore are better at then accepting the help that they need and getting the help they need. Men find that harder for all the different reasons we know and the stigma around it. So that's actually a protective factor for girls and women, that they're more likely to ask for help than men.
Let's talk about a healthy person. If a person wants to get themselves into a healthy state of mind, is there a checklist of activities that a person can build into their daily routine to help them? What can we do in the mental space just to build stronger mental muscles so that when things do arise, whether it's stress at work, whether it's just the daily demands of life, that we've just got better tools to help us get through things?
So there are so many things that we can do, like kind of almost like a mental workout. I think there's your more kind of generic ones that we underplay sometimes. And again, maybe because we've heard it so many times before and so we're really dismissive of it and they seem too simple to make a difference, but actually they're so crucial. So having enough sleep, having a really good diet, so important. Doing exercise. I mean, all the research and all the neuroscience.
These are all physical things.
So those are physical things that massively impact our mental health. That physical things that can change the way our brain sees things and change and release chemicals that actually help our mental health. So again, because they're physical things, people sometimes don't really understand how they can change. But again, huge research studies to say some of the best things that you can do are exercise. As I said, the chemicals that it releases, which will then help your mood in order for you to be able to function better. Just social connection. Actually making sure, which again, when you're feeling low, when you're feeling depressed, you can kind of try and avoid it, but making sure that we're doing things and pushing ourselves to actually have that social connection and go to things and go out and be active can be really helpful. But there's a lot of other kind of types of tools that we can do, and it's finding the ones that work for you and practice them. I often say, in the same way that parenting as well, I often say about it, it's a bit like a diet. There are so many different diets out there. And pretty much, unless they're extreme in some way, they all work. We just need to stick to them. So parenting's the same. There's lots of parenting strategies. We just need to stick to it. And same with our mental health. There's so many different things we can do, but we have to find the ones that we connect to the best and work. One of the really important things is around gratitude. And again, great research to show that if you just practice gratitude 3 times a day for 5 minutes, and just after, I think the change in the brain that it showed, just after 2 weeks of doing that was really exceptional. But just being able to reframe our mind and be able, and to, sometimes you have to fake it till you make it. So actually really sitting down and writing the list of the things that are good in life. And again, it sounds a bit cliched, but it really helps. Sometimes having a worry time. So again, for people who are really anxious, they can spend all day worrying. But actually, if they know there's 5 minutes in the day or 10 minutes in the day between 7 and 7:15 that I'm allowed to go and worry, will allow them to let go of the worry. Or even for children, having a worry jar, just being able to write down their worries and put them in a jar allows them to kind of move away. I mean, one of the things that I love, one of my favorite lines is like, you don't need to believe everything you think. And I think we're taught somehow unconsciously when we're younger that you have a thought in your mind, it must be true. When actually that's how our mind works. It lies to us. It tells us things that aren't true. And being able to understand that and understand how our brain works and understanding the psychoeducation around that, again, can be really transformative.
Wow, it's mind-opening to hear all this.
Yeah, there's so much stuff out there on the internet, to look at how can I look after my mental health, and going through mindfulness really works for some people, it doesn't work for others. Just really looking at...
I was wondering if you would touch on a sort of mental-based exercises, that deep breathing, are those things which are...
So mindfulness, I think for some people is brilliant, and meditation, but some people it doesn't work for, maybe doing it in an extensive way, but just even 3 minutes of breathing. 3 minutes of breathing in a certain way where you breathe in for, kind of hold for 4 seconds. So you breathe in, hold it for 4 seconds, and then breathe out like you're breathing out through a straw. Just doing that for 3 minutes every morning, or when you're feeling extra stressed, it really does help. And again, it's not just saying, oh, it's just deep breathing and de-stressing. Actually, what it does to the brain really reduces anxiety.
Really fascinating. If a child, or for the sake of this conversation, a teenager is struggling with any of these issues that we've discussed, how does this impact the rest of the family?
It can massively impact the family. I think, first of all, there's so much shame around it. There's so much self-blame that can happen from parents in terms of, why is my child like this? It must be something I did. We weren't good enough parents. Feeling that they don't want to share it because they're scared of being judged. Or even they might not be sharing it, but they want to respect that maybe their child doesn't want anyone to know. And that's also really important. Sometimes it's not always about their own shame, but maybe their child isn't at that place. But it's so different to physical illness for people, because they think, well, if their child has a physical illness, the shame isn't there. So therefore they can share it and they can get the support that they need. And it's not because of anything they did. Whereas so often with mental health, it feels like it must be something I did. It must be that's how other people will see it. That's how they see it themselves. There can be massive resentment from siblings, because it can actually take so much of the time of the parents. And we all know with siblings, it's always a fight to get your parents' attention. So they can feel very resentful, and the person struggling with mental health can be acutely aware of that. The parents can resent it as well, because actually this child struggling with mental health, even unconsciously, is totally changing how much time they can spend with their other children. So it can be really, really difficult and really tricky. And it's really important to have that self-compassion for yourself, to know that there's a lot of other people struggling out there, that it doesn't mean it's your fault that your child's struggling. It doesn't mean that there's not things that we can do that might help the situation. So both are important. How do we validate for ourselves and have that compassion for ourselves that actually this isn't necessarily my fault, or it isn't, but also that there are things that we can do and change that really might help our child who's struggling with it.
Right. Incredible. What would a parent or an educator, is there things that they can look out for, or things they can notice? Like from your professional perspective, like that's a flag, or that's a flag, and to help the child get earlier intervention than they otherwise would have if people wouldn't have recognized or known what to look out for.
So I think understanding what's normal adolescent behavior. So really to try and read some books around there. There's a great book that I love called Untangled by Lisa Darmore that talks about teenage girls. And a lot of it, she's a brilliant therapist, but a lot of it is about normal neuro, and it's just from, and even I found, I've read a couple of times, and I was recently reading it, and I have teenage boys, but I have one teenage girl. She's just become a teenager. And and I've studied this and I do this all day, every day. And it was really helpful to remind me some of the things about what's normal and actually how my daughter's picked. That's just totally normal. And I can just let go of that. And I could see I was kind of going into patterns of like over worrying about it. So really just understanding that. But I think it's about seeing when there's really drastic changes in behavior, in mood. If you've got a child who was really doing really well academically and all of a sudden she's absolutely not and she's failing, or she was used to being very kind of interested and doing lots of extra activities and now she's totally not interested. Her mood, doesn't seem to be finding joy in so many different things. When it's something that feels a bit kind of more extreme, then that's where it's important to be thinking about what other things they can do and whether or not their daughter might need extra help, or they might need some extra help in order to know how to help their daughter.
Right, so the next step would then be to reach out to somebody. What would that journey look like?
So it depends how willing their child is and what the communication. Sometimes it's just them getting a parent support family therapist person to help advise them. Sometimes it's about thinking about that with their child. So many times we hear from parents is, oh, my child refuses. They won't go to anything. They won't go to anyone. And so they feel very paralyzed. They can see their child's really, really struggling and in a really difficult way. And they're just refusing. So that's a really hard position to be in. And what I often advise is to be able to go to your child, and we all need a certain amount of control, but teenagers really need to feel in control. So it's to go to your child and say, I can really see you're struggling. And it's really painful to watch how difficult things are for you right now. And I can see that it's really hard. And so really validate their feelings. And I can see that it feels really hard to go and get support, but I just can't watch you continue to be in such difficult pain. But I want you to choose what you feel would be helpful for you. So to give them options that we could go to the GP and think about a referral to CAMHS. We could think about the school counsellor, or you could get a referral to NOAA, or we can go and find an art therapist because maybe that might be better, or like give them options and help them feel in control, really validate what's going on for them. But as a parent, you love them too much to allow them to just not do anything.
The issue we seem to be facing is one of recursion. We've got a struggling teen, for example, because they are struggling in return, they start to act or dress or behave in a certain way, and then they start to get judged for those behaviors, actions, dress codes, etc. What we needed was really an organization like NOAA to step in and to break that cycle of what's going on. They're feeling a certain way, behaving a certain way, they get judged for that behavior, and then the cycle repeats itself. And NOAA has stepped up and flipped the script for so many girls. I want to know how NOAA came about. What was the impetus, so to speak, that got this off the ground and started the journey that you're on?
We started 15 years ago. And at the time, there was nothing for adolescent girls who were struggling, like adolescent girls at risk. And I think as a Jewish community, we are exceptional at supporting the vulnerable. You know, we have phenomenal charities that we can be so proud of that help to look after the sick, kids with disabilities, people who can't afford to put food on the table. But at the time, there was nothing for girls struggling with their mental health or had really complex traumatic background. And I think it was actually Gandhi. I used to think it was Lord Jacobowitz, but actually Gandhi who said this, that you measure a community based on how it looks after its most vulnerable. And these were some of the most vulnerable girls in our community, and we just weren't supporting them. So at the time, I thought, we just need to start something. And again, it's just about starting small. And we started with, I think, 8 girls and a budget of 15,000. And I genuinely thought that if we could grow NOAA to support 30 girls in the community, we'd be supporting all the girls in the community who need it. And now we support over 300 girls.
On an ongoing basis.
300 girls a year. Yeah, we have about 150 on a weekly basis. And we still have a waiting list. And we're still not there in any way in terms of the demand. But it was just about really believing that actually we can turn this around for girls. We can change the trajectory of their lives if we get them that support, as you said, early enough. And change as well the way that they see themselves and their behaviours, but also change the way that the community see mental health and see these struggles. So that's an important part of what we do as well. It's not just about helping individual girls. It's also about helping the community to see it differently and to be able to give them that acceptance that they need and to think about what they're struggling with differently. That people judge what you see, they say, someone once said this to me, for girls, there's a 50-year walk of shame. And I remember that this thing, and it's so true, like how girls are judged. And how can we help people to see those behaviours differently? behaviors are all a communication. They're a communication of something else that's going on.
Yeah, I was going through the Impact 2024 report and many pages of information, and I strongly suggest anyone listening to this to head over to the NOAA website and to get a real deep dive into what's going on. But what struck me as more overwhelming than all the copy and all the text that was expressing what was going on in NOAA were the paintings that sort of accompanied a lot of the pages. Very deep, very raw, and obviously a lot of emotion and pain behind the brush of the artist of those paintings. What's the typical state of mind of a girl knocking on the doors of NOAA? Where are they up to?
Yeah. We have some amazing art. We have incredibly talented girls, like incredibly talented. I think that for each girl, it's different. That's it. Sometimes we kind of like try and lump it together. Every single girl has a different history, and every girl needs a different care package in order to kind of meet that. And I think if we just even think about some of those paintings, there's girls who did in the paintings, and I'm thinking of one of them that's really striking, who had such a difficult background, such horrific abuse, trauma. You can't believe that so much could happen to one person. And then there's a girl in there who also did a really striking painting, who comes from, such loving, incredible parents, giving parents. They put me to shame as a parent. They are phenomenal people who give so much. And obviously they've had two completely different experiences. Both of them have been exceptionally suicidal. Both of them have had severe mental health challenges. So, and that's the thing with NOAA. We have girls who've had this complex background. We have girls coming from the most wonderful families. When we started NOAA, the majority of the girls were from more complex backgrounds. And we used to sometimes say, and some of our girls are from really lovely homes. There was a few, but it was something we said. Now, I can't tell you how many times we have that. Really incredible families and parents whose children are severely struggling. And when I say no one is immune, I've seen it and I fundamentally believe it. Nobody is immune from mental health challenges. You never know who's going to be struggling with it and who isn't. But what's really important to know as well is that we're able to help girls at any stage. And the key is to be able to help girls as early on as possible. So we have different programs, and we have our mentoring program and sometimes our therapy program where girls can access it when they are struggling, but they don't have to be severely struggling. They don't have to be suicidal, or they're just struggling with life at the moment and need some extra support. And then we'll have girls who it may take a while for them to come through, and then it's every girl is
so broad, very broad, unbelievable. One girl at NOAA said, "Life felt insurmountable. Just surviving was too hard." Hearing a statement like that is really difficult. And obviously from a teenager's perspective, I want to understand, how are they seeing the world around them? Obviously we see them from the outside and we see the struggles and we see the story and the journey. They're the ones going through it. Give you an example of a girl that's gone through any of the scenarios you gave earlier. How are they seeing the world around them?
So thinking about the girl who actually said that, and thinking about some of our girls who really, really struggle with very severe depression. Actually, there's a really good video. It's literally a 2-3 minute video. I can't remember the full name. If you just Google the black dog depression, it's absolutely phenomenal in understanding, right? To really understand what it must be like to live with depression. And I think for people who feel that every day is a battle, literally every day to survive, they have to work and work to stay alive. And when there's tragically a suicide in the community, and people get really shocked by it, and we're thinking about what must have been for that person, that they caused them to take their life. And I think sometimes what we forget is how many people out there, every single day, they're going through such immense pain to stay alive. So we think about the person who died by suicide, but we forget that there's so many people out there who every single day, and they will survive, but every day is a battle. And it's about how we can give that support to be able to make their life less of a battle, because it doesn't have to be that way. For some people, it feels like there's just no point in living, even if they have loving and caring parents. And even if, again, thinking about one of the girls who painted this picture, the most incredible, you can see from the painting, incredibly talented person, super bright, so many great prospects, but she just cannot see that. She can't see any hope, any future, because every single day life just feels so insurmountable. So again, it's about what's going on for people in their mind. And so many times we talk about this idea that we don't understand what's going on behind doors. We don't understand what people have on their plate. But often I think about it is we also don't understand what size plate people have. And sometimes it's not necessarily about all the things that they have. It's about their feeling about it. It's about how they are able to manage what they do have and their beliefs and thoughts about it, and how we're able to help change it. And so if we look at it on a very basic, we're just like, well, just look what talents you have. Can't you see how artistic you are? Can't you see how bright you are? Can't you see how important it is to eat and how thin you are? But actually understanding that their mind is working so differently and how much you can push them and how much you can't, and having the patience to go on that journey with them. And I think that's so key. I mean, I am actually naturally a very impatient person because sometimes you want things to happen really fast. But it's really, really important to know that how much you can push and how much you have to gently be on their journey. And actually there's one of our girls we did a video, it was a couple of years ago, and she did the most beautiful card to us, which talked about, and we turned it into a video, which talked about being in a cave. And for her, what Noah meant was her key worker and her therapist coming into the cave with her and sitting with her in that cave and sitting in the darkness and holding that torch with her in that cave until she was then ready to very, very carefully and gently come out of the cave. And she was here for, I think, 5-6 years. That took a long time, but she's doing so much better. And it's being able to know that sometimes that's how long it takes. Yeah, and having that patience. And I think for parents as well, to be able to hold on to that hope, keep that patience, and just knowing how much, not getting stuck in it, to not get stuck. We have to hold the hope. Parents have to hold the hope of what's going on for the young person, but actually knowing how much to guide them and how fast you can guide them is really
such important. A raw description of that cave.
I know.
And the girl came up with that concept.
That's how she perceived it. She talked about it, and when we were like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. And that's why we turned it put it into a video.
Coming into their safe space. My next question to you was what the journey of a girl going through Noah looks like, but I think that just sums it up so beautifully.
Well, it can, but I think for every girl it's individual. Right. And it's so important that we keep that individualized approach. And that's really hard because the more girls you support and the need and the waiting list and the pressure, it's really hard to keep that in mind.
You just want to build a process that works for the masses. And
yes. Yeah. So it's really, we have a lot of different programs, whether it's an autism program or the eating disorder program, or we've got a new program, it's an emotionally based school avoidance program for girls who are really struggling. And for each of them, they need different things. So girls with autism might need social skills with a speech therapist, or girls with EBSA, because they missed a lot of school, they need specialized tuition. So it's really looking at what each individual girl needs and really hearing them. Really, and we have youth advisory boards, which are kind of the young people themselves, either graduates or the girls who are in their service, who when we're thinking about a new program or changing something, we'll really think about it with them and take their advice because they know best what's right for them. So we can think we're their experts, but actually the young people who are struggling at the moment or have struggled, they're the most important voices for us to be able to help to shape what Noah delivers.
It's really powerful. I've been thinking about this, like you just mentioned, there's so many different services and different segments. And in my mind, we've got this, if we had to visualize it as a sand timer, we've got this big opening at the top with lots of different people needing lots of different things. And they've been through various different experiences. And then they funnel down into this stage of life where they need support, guidance, empathy to help them get to a better place. And they come through that door, that narrow door to the Noah building. And then we've got this entire support ecosystem that's there for them and to catch them and to spread a net to give them everything they need. I'm just wondering how such a huge responsibility weighs on your shoulders and your team, and how you come in every morning here to say, right, we've got a big task on our hands to deal with. What does that look like?
So we have a phenomenal team. It is actually incredibly empowering working with, we're all females here. We have about 46 staff.
Oh, wow.
Honestly, it's such a privilege to work with them and their dedication and their care and their love and their professionalism. And it isn't easy. It really isn't easy work. But I think there's a couple of things. One is it's really important to have a really good supervision structure and to make sure so all our staff have very, very regular supervision. We have internal supervision, we have external supervision to make sure not only are we thinking about the young person and what they need, but also we're thinking about the impact on the staff member, and how, so to be able to catch that and to be able to make sure that we have that resilience and robustness to be able to help them in the best possible way. But I think the other thing is about how much strength we get from the young people themselves, and being able to watch their courage and watch them transform their lives. And I know that doesn't just happen, and it doesn't happen quickly, but when you work here for a certain amount of time and you see that, and you see girls totally transforming their lives, and to go and to have sometimes such horrific situations, and then to be able to go and lead healthy lives, we hold on to that, and that enables us to have the hope for the young people who aren't on that journey yet, or on the journey but aren't even nearly there. And knowing that really, really is incredibly strengthening. So again, obviously I've been here the whole time, 15 years, and I've seen so many young people turn their life around. I just keep holding on to that when sometimes it can feel so hopeless.
It's really fascinating. We're coming towards the end, but I just want to get some rapid fire questions from you just to get a last dig into what's going on over here. Give me an overall stats and facts of the impact that Noah's having each year across the schools, across the girls.
So we're supporting over 300 girls a year, and as I said, around 150 on a weekly basis. We're currently doing education in 14 schools. I think we've got girls coming from around 15 or 16 different school settings. We have a lot of different programs that we provide. So whether it's therapy, key working, mentoring, all different types. I think we've got 10 different types of therapy that we provide. So again, it's kind of that very individualized. I think what we're so fortunate about at NOAA is we have incredible impact. So we have a really good monitoring and evaluation system. We got a lottery grant about 8 years ago, which insisted, it was a very, very big grant, but it insisted that we had to spend 10% of our money on monitoring and evaluation. At the time, I think it was £10,000. We thought, what? Like that's, and now we do spend quite a lot more on that, because it's so important for the young person to be able to see that impact, for the staff to see it, and then for the funders to see it, which measures it. So we have like really phenomenal stats to show that not only do the girls themselves feel that we've made a positive impact, that we've built their self-esteem, that they understand themselves more, that they've got better relationships with their parents, but also actually the changes that they've had. So I think it's 72% of girls have reduced or recovered from eating disorders, 79%, and that's just in this past year, 79% reduced or recovered from disordered eating, 85% from self-harm. Like, we have really good stats to be able to show that what we do works.
It's incredible. I was going through the report, and it's very itemized and very detailed, and I thought this is incredible, because you've just got a full bird's eye view of what's being accomplished. In terms of the therapies that you mentioned, there's animal, music, drama. From a psychological perspective, how are those things impacting when somebody's nurturing or petting animals or playing music? What are those things doing in the mind that helps them on their recovery journey?
So I think the more creative therapies are a way of people able to express what they're struggling with in a way that's less intense sometimes, or feels more accessible to them. It can be really hard. It can be hard for adults to sit there and talk about what their challenges are, but particularly for teenagers. So actually, let's say if you're doing art therapy, being able to express yourself through art, and the art therapist will be looking at what that person's drawing and very carefully and gently thinking about some of those things that are going on for them in a way that they're able to manage. It's quite a skill to be able to do it in a way that the young person can receive and can cope with. So you have to really be able to understand where that young person is at. Different therapists do it. So with music therapy, it's not just that they're playing an instrument. It's about, or we do look a lot of voice therapy, voice kind of coaching. It's about being able to let out some of your strong feelings in a way that then can get interpreted by the therapist in a way, again, that helps to reflect back. So sometimes it's a space for them just to let out their strong emotions, and sometimes it's a way to reflect back to them what they're feeling so that they can get a better understanding of themselves.
That's really fascinating. We don't need to look far or wide to find a struggling teen, unfortunately, yet we are very quick to judge them for their actions, like we discussed earlier. But what we are seeing is really the fallout of the bigger experiences that they've been through, and not really the issue in and of itself. As we close up the conversation, what advice would you have for the wider community who are seeing what is generally the result of something far, far greater, to help them understand that from your perspective, your vantage point, you know there's so much more going on behind that are rising? What advice would you give us as to how we can perceive it and understand it?
So I think, first of all, it's about educating yourself and learning and understanding mental health. And there's so many videos, there's so many brilliant TED Talks, there's so many books that we can do so that we have a greater understanding. There is nothing quite like kind of the compassion and validation that you can give to a young person that can help them to be able to then be motivated to change. So sometimes what we think is that if we validate someone's thoughts, it's just going to entrench them in their struggles. I actually think that sometimes it's like when you aren't feeling so great about how you look and someone who's maybe struggling with their weight a bit and they want to go on a diet, the times where it's easier to do it is the times when you feel better about yourself. When you're feeling really rubbish today, I don't like how I look, you're more likely to go into negative cycles. So the more you can feel kind of good about yourself and validated, the more likely you're going to be motivated to change. So if we can really be there for our young people in the community or our children and really help that's their experience. Even if we don't understand it, even if we don't know what's going on, if we can help with compassion to see that that's how they're feeling at the moment, the more they feel understood, the more likely they will be to be motivated to actually do things that are helpful for them and positive change.
The future of many of these children really lies in the wider communities. As much as we don't feel it's not my issue or I don't know that person, but just a smile, being nice, making them feel good about themselves.
Yes.
That can really set them on the path to a brighter future. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
It's been incredible. I know you're busy, so honestly, really appreciate it. And Hashem should bench you with all the next steps of your journey to be able to keep helping and changing the lives of people for the better. Thank you, friends, for tuning in. I hope you found this conversation insightful. And if you did, share it with a friend who may enjoy it too. Thank you, Alex Haffner and Maxim Cohen from the Jewish Lending Institute for your continued support of this podcast. Until next time.